Transportation Committee meeting for reasons stated in the Governor's Emergency Executive Order. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. When we do so, Becky will call the roll in alphabetical order. I, the other council members, and the public who may be monitoring the meeting must be able to hear your voice. When your name is called for each vote, please clearly state yea or nay or abstain so I can determine whether a majority voted in favor of the motion. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. So with that, Becky, can you call the roll?
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson. Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Sterner. Zirin.
Present.
Barber.
Here. Thank you very much. With that, I will call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for September 28th, 2020. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. We'll proceed with the agenda. There would be one minor change. We're going to move the regional bicycle transportation network guidelines to the end of the information items, so we make sure we have enough time for the other two items on information. If there is no any other changes or additions, we can move ahead with just approval of the agenda, and we do not need a roll call for that. All right, with that, we'll proceed with the agenda as planned. Our next order of business is approval of the minutes from the September 14th, 2020 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? All right, if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So move.
Moved by Gonzalez, and is there a second?
Seconded by Zirin.
Seconded by Zirin. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the minutes are approved. Next, we move on to our TAB reports, and we have Peter Dugan from TAB. You're on mute, Peter.
Yes, user error. Thank you, folks. Everybody should be laughing at that. That's okay, you can laugh at it. One of these days I'll get all this straight. I don't know for everybody else, but I'm using Microsoft Teams, WebEx, and Zoom, and sometimes I do get a little crisscross among them all. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, the honorable committee members, General Manager Koistra, Director Thompson, and Becky. Thank you for doing all behind the scenes work to get this up and running. Brief report. As you know, you have two background, I'm sorry, I'd like to give you background on two consent items that you have. The first is the UPWP, and as you know, just in a quick review, that is a summary of all the planned expenditures and budgeted expenditures for transportation planning activities in the metro. So it is actually the MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, budget and how it will be spent, and it includes the expenditures of the Met Council, MnDOT, MPCA, and the MAC. The other element, the other item that is on the consent agenda is a streamlined TIP amendment. And as you may recall, the streamlined TIP amendment process was changed last year, and the 3 points that must be present for the streamlined TIP to be used are: the project must be consistent with the TPP. And this is the big change. The regional significance. It used to be that it had to be regionally significant. Now it could not be regionally significant. Now it can either be not regionally significant, or if it's regionally significant in the tip, but it's not changing the impact that the project will have, and that the process does not need to go through a formal scope change. I also want to take a moment, though, if I may, off script, to congratulate General Manager Koistra on one of his drivers being listed as a hero of the pandemic in Sunday Star Tribune, and also want to commend him and Mr. Carlson on the great presentations to tab of Network Next, the 20-year plan to expand and improve the bus service, and you'll be hearing more about that later today. In terms of the reports from the different agencies, MPCA is working hard on getting the RFPs for the VW money, and that will be going into charges, charges outstate, conversion of the diesel buses, school buses primarily, to electric, and conversion of or replacement of diesel in heavy-duty off-road vehicles. And the clean car draft rule is expected in the fall. And lastly, with regarding the MAC, here are the statistics. They're really, I think, very interesting. First of all, the work on Highway 5 is going very smoothly, and MnDOT also reported with the lower traffic volumes due to COVID, their work is on time, which is great. In the last week of August of this year, 80,000 passengers went through TSA. In 2019, in the same time frame, 240 passengers went through TSA. But that is a change from the first week of April, when only 15,000 passengers went through TSA. The passenger employment at the airport, which is both folks taking off and transferring flights or switching flights, is down 75%. Flight operations in August, meaning the number of takeoffs and landings, were 478. In 2019, they were almost 1,200. Parking is up from 1,000 to 4,000. Concessions about 25%, 25 have limited hours, 4 open full-time. And but in regard to the airline or the airport itself, the airport enforces a mandatory mask policy. It has 250 automatic hand sanitizers throughout the airport. Cleaning crews are adjusting schedules so that they do as much cleaning of the outside, so let's say of the restrooms and the passenger areas, as they do the inside. Delta is keeping the middle seat open through the end of the year, and Southwest will keep them open through Thanksgiving and evaluate after that. Madam Chair, that concludes my report. If there are any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions for Mr. Dugan? Councilmember Chambliss.
No question. I just really appreciate, Mr. Dugan, I really appreciate you giving us an update on the impacts of the pandemic. We've been dealing with this for quite some time, and it's really important for us to have those updates so that, we can be assured that of where things are or where things need to be addressed. So thanks.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Right. Any additional questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. Next, we're on to other reports. We have MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair and members, thank you. Today, just in the past couple hours, Governor's Blue Ribbon Committee, looking at the Met Council structure and transit governance in the region, met. They are going to meet every 2 weeks. This was their second meeting. I thought I'd provide occasional updates on this committee since they're aligned with the Transportation Committee schedule. Today's topic at the Blue Ribbon Committee was really the MPO structure of the council. So both myself and Amy Venowitz presented and answered questions on how the history of the MPO designation of the council, how the structure of TAB and the Transportation Committee and council works together, and then some information about legal requirements of an MPO, and if there are a redesignation of MPO, what process would have to go through in our region to redesignate that. We made the presentation. MnDOT also presented some information about the MPOs in Greater Minnesota, and we took questions from committee. This committee is made up of several members that are current or former CAB members, several former or regional administrators and chairs of council. So they're fairly familiar with the structure, and they had good questions about the federal law and changes in state law, but it was informational only. The next meeting of the committee will be in 2 weeks, and at that point, they're going to discuss transit governance. So there'll be presentations at that time from the state auditor who performed an audit of the governance in the region back in 2011, and there'll be information from the House research staff. This Wednesday, council members in the MBTA area will be attending MBTA's monthly board meeting. They meet on Wednesdays, which is usually a conflict, but there are usually 1 or 2 times a year where we don't have a council meeting and they invite council members. Part of this meeting, we will be discussing the topic of the decision we've made recently to move the red line operations from our MTS division to Metro Transit. That will be occurring in December. The red line since 2013 has been a function of the MTS division where we contract out to MBTA and they contract out to a private provider. So we're just rearranging that structure starting at the December pick on December 5th. No impact to the red line for customers. The hours and the service levels will continue as they are today. And next year we'll be getting a new fleet for red line. So if anything, the future is very bright for red line customers in the South Metro area. For an operations update, this past weekend, we successfully transferred operations of the Washington-Ramsey Transit Link service to a new provider, First Transit, as part of a 5-year agreement that they competitively won in this committee and the council approved early in the summer. So that transition is going well. And lastly, I think the last Transportation Committee, I talked about the Aware taxi transportation service for COVID positive or COVID symptomatic people who we want to transport separately from transit services. Well, since that time, the state's Department of Human Services issued some guidance to counties, local counties in our region, making them aware of this transportation service. And we've got a lot of interest from county who have clients that they're trying to get to COVID testing or that they know are positive and need to get to healthcare. We've already formed partnerships with Washington and Anoka counties to make sure they're using our Aware taxi service. And we anticipate that other counties in the 7-county area will quickly join on to that as a safe way to make sure that customers that they're serving are getting, that cost is not a barrier to them getting a COVID test. And also that if they do have COVID, that they have a safe way to transport themselves to medical appointments without necessarily infecting other passengers on public transit. So that program is going well and expanding, and thank the Department of Human Services and counties for partnering with us. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Any questions from council members? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to General Manager Quistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to begin with a Metro Transit COVID update. To date, we have 97 employees that have been diagnosed with COVID since the start of the pandemic. This includes 15 confirmed COVID cases thus far in September. You might recall that we had 26 confirmed cases in August, and then prior to that, we had, I believe, 2 or 3 months where there was somewhere between 10 and 15 cases, perhaps around 11. I don't have that data in front of me, but I know it's between 10 and 15 cases. Of the 15 September cases, they've been spread across several facilities. Nicollet has had 4. I know that one of those cases was a Nicollet employee who had not been to work for weeks because they were out of the country. Haywood has had 3, South 2, Metro Transit Police Department 2, Green Line 1, Blue Line 1, East 1, and Ops Support Center 1. So the importance of being spread across the facilities is that we don't appear to be having any single spread occurring in one location, and that certainly helps in our management of the issue. And we continue to manage these cases diligently and identify contacts and ensure that the proper isolation is occurring where there have been contacts that require that. In addition, I want to provide an update on the COVID-related OSHA complaints. As the council and the media were made aware of some complaints regarding Metro Transit's COVID protocols and practices. So far, we are aware of 5 OSHA complaints that resulted out of that, and 1 for bus and 4 for light rail transit. These were filed over the past 3 to 4 weeks. 2 of the 5 complaints resulted in a more formal review and an on-site visit. We were told at both of those exit conferences that there were no concerns as a result of their review, and no citations resulted, and that there was not, the concerns expressed to them were not validated. The other 3 were what we refer to, or OSHA refers to, as informal reviews, and those were all LRT complaints. OSHA did not do site visits in these cases, but rather requested written responses to their questions. And it's our understanding or our belief, since we've not heard back from them, that those informal reviews are considered closed. I've been told that OSHA does not always formally, on the informal reviews, always send out a closure notice, but because it's been so long since we've submitted the written comments, we're assuming that those items have been closed. If we learn of a different status, we'll certainly let you know right away. So far, we have not heard from the OSHA complaints of any changes required from our current protocols and operations related to COVID protections. You might also recall that I requested an independent third-party review to assess our COVID safety protocols, and that review is still going on in addition to the OSHA reviews. So that we want to make sure what we're doing right, and we will report to you on what we hear from that review as well, but that third-party review is still ongoing. I also want to share our latest ridership figures. For the week of September 14th, system-wide ridership was down 67% compared to pre-pandemic ridership. Buses down 64%, Blue Line is down 73%, Green Line 71%, and North Star is still at 96%. If you looked at more closely and disaggregated some of the bus data, many of the commuter routes and express routes are also down, like North Star, by 95, 96%. And then finally, I wanted to share with you that our Homeless Action Team won a St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce Award. These are leaders in government, leaders in local government awards, and HAT won the Chamber's Award for Innovation. And I just wanted to congratulate Chief Frizzell, Captain Blakey, and the entire Homeless Action Team on an award that's well-deserved. So great news. That's all I have, and I'm open for questions, Madam Chair. You're on mute.
Thank you. Councilmember Zarin.
Chair, Mr. Koistra, I just missed who the award was given from to the HAT team. Could you go over that one more time for me, please?
Sure. The award was from the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. And the award was for, this is their awards they give to leaders in local government. And this particular award was their award for innovation.
Okay, any additional questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing that, Wes, please convey our congratulations to the HAT team and to the team over there, because it's we're all very proud of the work that they do, and it's nice to see it being recognized. So thank you very much.
I'll be very happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next we're on to our consent agenda. There are 2 items on consent. Could I entertain a motion to approve the items on consent?
Chambliss makes a motion to approve.
Moved by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Second by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, could you call the roll?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the consent items are passed and we'll move on consent to the full council. Next, we have our non-consent items. And we have a presentation for business items 2020-246 through 2020-251, all related to the blue line or to the D line. And we have Shaheen Jafari. I'm going to get closer on that, and Katie Roth here to present.
Good afternoon, Chair Barber, council members. I'm Katie Roth, Assistant Director of BRT Projects. I'll just kick things off here briefly. As you'll recall, the D line is an 18-mile bus rapid transit line from Brooklyn Center to Bloomington, which follows the Route 5. And Route 5 remains our highest ridership bus route and has retained more riders this year than many of our other core routes in the system. During COVID, Route 5 is carrying more people each day than most bus routes did last year. We're continuing to serve a lot of essential trips in this corridor every single day for communities who depend on us the most. And as we do so, the need for investment here remains strong amidst the challenges that we've experienced in 2020. Additionally, investing in the D line also means investing in communities of color, where nearly 3/4 of riders identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So as we look to this investment, we hope to construct the 40 stations and other improvements along this line starting in the spring of 2021, breaking ground next year, with 2 full years of construction ahead of service beginning before the end of 2022. However, the project budget is still $20 million short of being fully funded, and that gap needs to be filled this fall in order for project construction to begin next year. We continue to hope that the legislature passes a bonding bill next month that would include this amount and keep the D-Line project on track. If that doesn't happen, we will work to identify the next steps, but the likeliest outcome at this point would be a year's worth of delay in the project. As we await news from the Capitol, staff are continuing to work hard every single day to advance all of the pieces of this complex project and ready the D-Line for construction advertisement in November, should the full funding be secured. After finalizing the design itself, the most critical of these steps is advancing the interagency agreements with our city and county partners, and we have proposed actions for you to consider today on 5 such agreements, in addition to a 6th business item. At this point, I will hand things off. Presenting these items today is the person who has shepherded these agreements for many months, D-Line Project Manager Shaheen Jafari.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as Katie also indicated, the development of the D-Line BRT project has been a multi-agency effort through continued coordination with our agency, regional agency partners since the beginning of the project planning phase in 2018. Through this coordination, our agency partners of Hennepin County, City of Minneapolis, and Bloomington identified their locally requested scope to be constructed in conjunction with the D-Line construction. The locally requested scope will generally consist of pedestrian and signal improvements at D-Line intersections, as well as shared fiber optic communication infrastructure along the corridor. The intent behind the inclusion of this work within the D-Line construction is to minimize overall disruption to adjacent communities while maximizing efficiency. And it builds on a model that worked previously with Hennepin County on the C-Line BRT project. To construct the D-Line BRT project and associated locally requested scope, joint powers and cooperative construction agreements will be needed with Hennepin County and the cities of Minneapolis, Bloomington, and Richfield, where the project footprint is located. Cooperative construction agreements are needed for the design and construction and easement acquisition costs related to the locally requested scope, and joint powers agreements are needed for our local partners to exercise their right-of-way management powers for the construction of the D-Line project and the locally requested scope. Next slide, please. So we have today 5 business items for joint powers agreements and cooperative agreements, and 1 business item for the rejection of bids for construction contract 20P156. In the next few slides, I'll provide a quick overview of each business item along with the proposed action on each for the committee's consideration. Next slide, please.
And if I may, after we present each one of these, we will do a vote. So we'll pause in between and we'll do our roll call vote in between there.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So item 2020-246, the Minneapolis Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement will allow construction of the pedestrian and signal improvements at 19 intersections along the D-Line corridor, as well as some fiber optic infrastructure. Through this agreement, the city will commit to the design and construction and easement acquisition costs, and will also exercise its right-of-way management powers for the project. The proposed action is that Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Agreement 20I-0464, that's again 20I-064, with the city of Minneapolis in the amount of approximately $4,700,000 for shared fiber communication infrastructure and locally requested pedestrian and signal improvements at 19 intersections along the D-Line BRT project. Madam Chair, at this point, I will be happy to answer any questions on this business item or action.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-246, City of Minneapolis Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. And with that, that motion carries. Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2020-247, the City of Bloomington Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement will allow for the construction of pedestrian signal improvements at 1 intersection and a share of fiber network from Mall of America to downtown Minneapolis. Through this agreement, the city will commit to the design costs for the shared fiber and the construction costs for the pedestrian signal improvements, as well as the shared fiber. The city will also exercise its right-of-way management powers for the project. The proposed action is that Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Agreement 20I-022 with the city of Bloomington in the amount of approximately $500,000 for the shared fiber communication infrastructure and locally requested pedestrian improvements in conjunction with the D-Line BRT project. Madam Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions on this item.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-247, City of Bloomington Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Second by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, that motion carries. Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2020-248, the Hennepin County Joint Powers Agreement, Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement will allow for the construction of pedestrian and signal improvements at 6 intersections. Through this agreement, the county will commit to the design, construction, and easement acquisition costs, and will also exercise its right-of-way management powers for the project. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Agreement 20I-024 with Hennepin County in the amount of approximately $3,500,000 for locally requested pedestrian and signal improvements at 6 intersections along the D-Line BRT project. I'm sure I'd gladly answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? If not, I entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-248, Hennepin County Joint Powers and Cooperative Construction Agreement.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Chambliss seconds.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin. Zirin. Barber.
Aye. And with that, the motion carries.
Good.
And getting there. All right, back to you, Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2020-249, the Hennepin County Fiber Optic Reimbursement Agreement will allow for a county requested share of 144 fiber strands or 50% of the fiber network installed along the D-Line corridor from Mall of America to Park Avenue in downtown Minneapolis. It is worth noting at this point that the county will be using a different funding source for the shared fiber communication infrastructure than their pedestrian and signal improvement work, and will therefore require a separate agreement for the fiber. Through this agreement, the county will commit to the reimbursement of design and construction costs for its share of the fiber communication network. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Agreement 20I-023 with Hennepin County in the amount of approximately $1,200,000 for financial participation in the construction of the fiber optic communication network along the D-Line BRT project corridor. With that, Madam Chair, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? All right, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-249, Hennepin County Fiber Optic Reimbursement Agreement.
Chambliss makes a motion to approve the agreement.
Moved by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Zirin's an aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2020-250, the City of Richfield Joint Powers Agreement will allow for the city to exercise its right-of-way management powers for the project. The City of Richfield has no locally requested scope or costs included in the D-Line project. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Joint Powers Agreement 20I-058 with the City of Richfield for easements, permits, and right-of-way management authority needed for the construction of the D-Line project. Madam Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-250, City of Richfield Joint Power Agreement.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner, Zirin,
Zirin, aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries, and we are on to the last business item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Final business item 2020-251 is a rejection of bids for construction contract 20P156. The construction of the D-Line system-wide communication conduit project was broken out and advertised as a separate contract to further maximize our costs and schedule efficiencies by fast-tracking this work. The contract IFB was released on August 15th, and bids were opened on September 15th. The council received two bids in the amounts of $1,242,485 and $3,573,056. The low bidder was deemed non-responsive, and the second bidder is more than 100% above our estimate, and contract award is therefore not recommended. The proposed action is that Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to reject all bids received for the D-Line system-wide communication conduit construction project, contract number 20P156. Madam Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions on this action.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members?
Madam Chair, I do have a question.
Councilmember Zarin.
My question is, if we reject this, how does that impact our schedule? And do we have enough time built into the schedule to accommodate a rebidding on this? Thank you.
Katie or Shaheen?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Zarin, thank you for your question. Yes, our schedule at this point would not be impacted. We are able and looking at alternatives for either rebidding this project or pending what the bonding will look like, taking additional actions to ensure that the contract is either awarded as a rebid and awarded as a separate item or combined with the major construction to ensure that we do remain on schedule. Katie, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, it's unusual, I would expect, to have two bids, first of all, so differing so greatly, and to have one non-responsive and the second one 100% above. What do you attribute these unusual bidding responses to? And how would you change the request going forward?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I can answer this one. I think, yes, we were certainly surprised to see these two bids, but given the time in the season when we were advertising this work, there was some risk that a contractor unable to complete the work within the time frame would have a cost that reflected working through the winter, and I think we're seeing some of that in the bids. So I think the timing is one of the greatest things that we can affect in rebidding this work as we look to fit it in elsewhere in the D-Line project schedule.
All right, additional questions?
I was going to have questions, but the questions that came forward were related to my questions, and the answers were sufficient to make me feel like we're going to have another opportunity to get this done. So that's great.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Any other questions from council members?
Council member moves the business item.
Moved by Zarin. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, could you call the roll?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson. Fredson. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Zieren's aye.
This is
Barber.
Fredson. I'm an aye.
Thanks, Fredson. Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. So thank you very much. Thank you, Shaheen and Katie. Very exciting to see activities move ahead on the D line. We're going to keep our fingers crossed all of the month of October, hoping that the bonding money comes through. But very exciting to see the progress. So thank you very much. To council members, I think all but the last one can go on consent to the full council unless I hear otherwise from one of you. Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Now we're on to our information items. As I said, we kind of reordered things a little bit. So we're going to start with the TPP public comment and responses. We have Amy Venowis and Sarah Mosky here.
Madam Chair and members, the presentation we have for you today is about the TPP public comments and responses. It's Sarah Maskey will give you a little bit of an update of how we approached our public engagement and the types of tools we used and the response that we got. And then at the end of the presentation, I will go through the general comment themes and some background on what is already in the TPP related to those themes, and then proposed changes that we will be making in response to those comments. And then we will be coming back to you with additional information on the exact changes to the TPP. We haven't set the date for that yet, but it would be in October. And then reminding you that we will be asking you to adopt the TPP in late October, and the full council will be adopting it on November 18th. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to give kind of the opening slides here on how we approached our public engagement process.
So Amy just went over the timeline, so I won't spend any time on that
online
right now.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Can everyone hear me okay now?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Amy went over the timeline, so I'll just jump right in. This will be a little bit of a review since I presented the plan to the Transportation Committee before we went out for public comment. So these are the audiences that we engaged as part of the 2020 update to the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan. So our formal council partners, organizations including business, advocacy, cultural, workforce, education, organizations, and neighborhood groups, cities, counties, and townships throughout the Twin Cities region, advocacy groups, and residents of the region. Next slide, please. We provided information, education, promotion, and engagement with our formal and informal partners. We provided translated communications that allow those who don't speak or read English the opportunity to comment. As themes have emerged, we're reporting those themes back to you, and we can also provide any presentation on the feedback as requested by outside groups or others throughout the Met Council as we go through the formal review channels. Next slide, please. We use the council's website, newsletter, social media, and email distribution channels to provide information about the TPP and how we can receive people's feedback. Outreach to key constituencies. We leverage social media to elicit responses to some of the pressing issues around transportation in the region. And I'll remind you of some examples in just a minute here. As required, we placed a classified ad in the Star Tribune, and we hosted an online public hearing in association with the Transportation Committee on July 27th. Next slide, please. So as you are aware, much of the input into the TPP happens over time through studies, like the recently completed freeway interchange study and the in-process regional transit service allocation study. All of that input changes and influences the plan when minor updates like this happen. We want to be sure that in this process, key constituencies had one more opportunity to provide feedback and guidance on the publication of the TPP update. That the process engaged a cross-section of the region's residents, including residents from all parts of the region and from a range of demographic groups. The council's partners, stakeholders, and constituents had the opportunity to engage with the process through appropriate and authentic engagement, and that the council grew its capacity to interact with communities, stakeholders, and constituencies. And just next slide, please. Just as a reminder here, these are some of the social media posts that we did that were looking towards some of the future studies related to COVID-19, electric vehicles, and those performed really well. We did do some boosting of these posts, so we were able to reach a wider audience. And next slide, please. And I will turn this back over then to Amy to continue on.
Thank you, Sarah. So one of the things we're pretty impressed with is that despite being online this year, 100%, we did receive a significant amount of comments with about 215 people or people representing organizations. And within the comments sent in, or the materials sent in, we identified about 420 distinct comments. Our typical process is to take those comments and rather than respond to each one individually, group them into comments that are either identical or very similar in nature. And this year, I did want to note that we got a lot of very similar comments, primarily due to the fact that we were aware that the Sierra Club did send out a notice to their members asking them to comment and providing them with suggested comments to submit. However, I want to note that many of the people who went through the process of doing that didn't just submit the identical comment that the Sierra Club had provided. They did take the time to either add additional comments or to kind of give the comment their own little flavor and spin on why they thought it was important. And so it was one organization, but 100 plus people. And we do take those comments very seriously. And so we're not trying to discount them just because they came from one common organization. But having said that, then when we went through the comments, we were able to identify 3 primary themes or comments from the 420 that we received, and they're listed here on the screen. I'm not going to read them right now. We'll go to the next slides. And then as I'm going through the slides, I will give you a little bit of information about what currently is in the TPP or what our general response to the comment is. And then I'll follow it up with how we are suggesting we change the TPP draft also to be in response to the comment. So the first major comment you see on the screen is that generally we eliminate all road expansion or capacity projects within the TPP, and that we refocus our investment in transit and active transportation modes. And really the purpose of doing this would be to mitigate climate change and lower vehicle miles traveled in the region, which would also then have an impact on climate change. So our general response to this comment is that we have little flexibility within our transportation funds to move them between modes. Most of our funding at the regional system level is dedicated under either state or federal law. The regional solicitation, which the TAB and the council does control, represents only about 3% of total transportation spending in the region, but it does offer an opportunity to move funds between modes. Over the past few years, the solicitation has really been spent historically 55% on roadways, 30% on transit, 15% on bike and ped. And within that, while we note that roadways does have the majority of the spending, most of our roadway projects contain significant multimodal spending by including sidewalks or trails or transit advantages within those projects. Also related to road expansion, the current TPP, our highway investment direction, specifies that before moving to a capacity solution, that we first focus on management or what we call technology solutions to manage the traffic. Then, if those are not adequate, move to identifying low-cost, high-benefit spot mobility improvements, so kind of small improvements at the roadway level. Third, where appropriate, the plan calls for implementing min-pass lanes, which, while they are roadway capacity, also benefit transit and carpoolers. And then the final solution that we point to for a roadway improvement is strategic capacity improvements. Next slide, please. Also related to this comment, we do, in the current TPP update draft, have two projects which are focused on looking at the impacts of transportation on climate change. And the first is an electric vehicles planning study, which is just in the process of kicking off. The purpose of this study is to identify strategies that would accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles throughout the region, not just within transit, but we're talking about private vehicle fleet and how we would market and encourage electric vehicle adoption to speed it up. The second project is actually being led by our Community Development Division, and that is a project on planning scenarios for greenhouse gas emissions is the title. The purpose of this project is to develop a tool that would allow local governments, including the council, to test a combination of strategies and evaluate the impact that those strategies might have on reducing climate change or mitigating climate change, and then selecting a package of strategies that is most appropriate for that unit of government. We also point out as part of our response that while we actually have what we think is fairly limited road expansion in the TPP, we do have significant investments in transitway expansion through our variety of both dedicated transitways and arterial BRT transitways that are funded within the TPP. Next slide, please. So having said all that, we are still proposing to make some changes to the TPP update draft in response to that comment. And one of the proposals is to add text to the TPP overview, which clarifies and emphasizes that much of our regional transportation spending is inflexible and that we're not able to move it across modes. We are also adding text in both the overview and highway chapter to clarify that really the first point in our process before we move to roadway expansion solutions is looking at travel demand management, or TDM, and land use solutions. Those are the first priorities before we move to any type of roadway mobility solution issue. And so there is text being added in a number of locations to emphasize that point. We are also adding a regional TDM study to the work program chapter. Just as a quick reminder, the work program chapter points out major planning studies that we will be conducting over the next 4 years prior to the 2050 plan update, and with the intent that the results of these studies would be incorporated into the next plan, the 2050 plan. So the regional TDM study will look at how we have been approaching TDM within the region and specifically focusing on telework, telecommuting, which we know has really undergone some change during the COVID-19 event. And then, the final bullet here points to recognizing that we've had a lot of success of teleworking in the past 6 months during COVID in reducing highway congestion. And so we can right now today see on the street that can have a substantial impact on the need for capacity additions on our roadway system. Next slide, please. The second major theme comment that we received on the TPP update was that our region's Black, Brown, Indigenous communities and our low-income populations are the ones who are most impacted by climate change, and that we as a region should plan and invest to mitigate these inequities. The general response we have to this comment is that we agree, and we hope that the TPP update does acknowledge this currently in the overview, in our goals, in our equity chapter, and also in our work program chapter. We have currently a study area within the work program chapter that we call on to do equity related studies, and we have an equity analysis for transportation, which under the current version that went out for public comment called for looking at safety outcomes by race and income, and also looking at the spending on preservation, roadway preservation by race and income, and analyzing the impacts of COVID on the travel patterns by race and income. So our response to this comment is to broaden the work that we are intending to do in the area of equity. And we are adding a new work program item to call for an equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. This would be a large evaluation that would essentially take an equity lens to our current transportation funding processes, our planning processes, our programming or our project selection processes, and raise questions and issues about whether these processes are equitable, and if they are not, what might be some potential solutions that we could implement. So this study, we're adding it to the TPP, but it also is called for in our 2021 UPWP, which was on your agenda today for adoption. And so we are intending to get this off as quickly as possible and are intending to have conversations with MnDOT on areas we can partner in this work too. Next slide, please. The third big comment that we received was really a fairly specific comment relating to including best practices in parking policy within our TPP. And the purpose of doing that would be to help influence climate change and the impacts of climate change on our region. So our general response to this comment is that we do feel that the TPP includes a fair amount of references to parking's role in the transportation system. This is in our land use and local planning chapter 3. Within that chapter, we discuss parking demand management and the need for parking demand management. We provide links to 2 best practices and references on how to manage surface parking, and this is meant as a local technical assistance. We also talk about the use of parking practices to mitigate climate impacts such as flooding on our regions, communities, and then we consider, this is not part of the TPP, but part of our Livable Communities program, that we do use parking policies as a scoring tool within that program to give extra points for communities and projects that are implementing parking policies to reduce parking. Our added TDM work program, which I referenced earlier, which will be looking at how we manage travel demand within the region, will likely have items that focus on parking and parking policy and would provide potentially recommendations on changes to the TPP related to parking policy. And as I said, those would be included in the next update for the 2050 plan. So next slide, please. So we did receive a number of other comments that one or two individuals submitted, and we looked through those comments and also try to find opportunities to make changes to the TPP update. A couple of the other changes that we're intending to make, we were asked and agreed to clarify our definition and the term ACPs so that we no longer use the term ACP 50. We are changing some wording in Appendix F, which is how we approve conversions from sections to interchanges, to clarify that safety is not the only reason or need that needs to be demonstrated to get approved for an interchange, and that sometimes actually I have that backwards. That mobility and congestion is not the only need that justifies an interchange, but that sometimes safety and the need for safety can justify the need to move an intersection to an interchange. We also added some language to note that Washington County is leading the Trunk Highway 36 transit study, and we have a number of updates to transit ways within the transit chapter just to reflect the current status of the transit way work. Next slide, please. So a number of the comments that we received also were fairly large, and are comments that we're really not able to address with this update of the TPP. And so we kind of keep those comments in our awareness and we pass them on to our partners and we continue to work on them. But we want to point out that the next update of the plan, not just the transportation plan, but the regional development guide, which we're beginning to work on, will occur in 2024 and hopefully address some of these bigger issues in more detail. Some of the issues that we're intending to address, primarily climate change and the region's role in mitigating climate change and actions we can take related to climate change, strategies for reducing racial inequities. Specifically for transportation, we're expecting that a lot of those recommendations will come out of the equity study that I referenced. We also heard, and this was a comment primarily from TAB, that our next plan needs to do a better job of connecting transportation, jobs, housing, and economic development, and laying out a clear vision for our region on all of those issues interconnected. And then clearly tying proposed major investments in our system plans to the regional goals and outcomes that we have identified in our region. So that's a lot of work for us into the future, but good news is that we've got a couple years to accomplish it. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess we are at the end. So with that, I can take any questions specific to our comments and responses. And as I said, we will be bringing the actual language that we're incorporating into the TPP to you in a couple weeks, or at least mailing it out to you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Amy and Sarah. I see Councilmember Chambliss has a question.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I was glad to see so many people commenting and giving such comprehensive comments to help us improve our transportation plans. I'm looking forward to seeing that final stage of that. Also, it was refreshing to hear that there was the success of teleworking during the COVID pandemic in terms of reducing the congestion. I've been saying that for years. And to finally have that on a piece of paper, it's been researched, documented, and we can look at those benefits. And also, I'm thinking in addition to that, what can we do now that we know that things may be changing permanently in terms of hopefully lowered congestion, also people teleworking more often. What does that mean in terms of us being able to shift some of our resources to other areas with the gains that we have based on those changes? So I'd like to see that information. Glad to see the information talking about the impacts on communities of color and racial inequities, which have, in many cases, been historical, entrenched, enduring inequities. And for that reason, collecting the data about historical inequity is very important. So I've been kind of trying to push for us to include that in our research and our planning. It's really tough to address inequities if we are not collecting the data points that we need to address those historical, enduring, and entrenched inequities. For example, with the Native American community and also African Americans who are descendants of slaves. I'm glad that the new census allows us to see those cultural differences and collect those cultural differences. And I'm hoping that we will be able to incorporate that to inform us and help us do better policy planning.
Deb, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I am. So maybe talk a little bit about the post-COVID study that is in the TPP update, because that is a big part of it, at least to address Ruva's first comments.
Madam Chair and members, sure. So within the current TPP update, we had the work program. We included a number of items related to COVID. Specifically, one of them was related to a survey of what is occurring in travel patterns. You have heard, at least on one occasion, from Jonathan Ehrlich about the first round of that survey and the results that we're seeing related to how COVID-19 changed travel patterns around the region. And I believe he gave us a lot of information about how that differed among racial groups and income groups. So that survey has at least 2 more rounds where we're going to continue to collect additional data. Unfortunately, Jonathan is not on today, so I might lose some of my details here. But the next round, we're doing a little bit differently in that we're broadening who we are asking to take the survey. We're not just going to people who had previously responded to our travel behavior inventory. So that survey the COVID-19 survey will conclude, I believe, early next year. But then we are also currently looking at how to change our ongoing travel behavior inventory work and questions in relation to both what we've learned through COVID and also getting a more representative sample. And so we'll be bringing quite a few presentations over the future months to you about our updated approach to that and also the results of the survey that we're doing today. I do not, unfortunately, envision a lot of specific data on that being in this current TPP update because it really just is so new, other than the fact that we call for the survey and we acknowledge kind of what I call the success of telecommuting during the COVID event.
Thank you, Amy. And I think some of the conversations we've had about how whether the research we're doing on COVID-19 or the work that we're doing related to equity, how that can really inform that next update. That's a bigger update of the TPP. So thank you for your comments, Councilmember Chambliss. Are there any additional questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Amy and Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. And next we are on to regional solicitation funding scenarios. We have Steve Peterson here.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Next slide, if we go to the next slide. So today we're coming to you on the regional solicitation. We're towards the end of our 2-year cycle, which is the fun part. And we're looking for feedback on the different funding options that we can bring through the process to our TAB committee and ultimately to the council. So on the lower half of the screen, this is our general setup for the regional solicitation. We've got the 11 categories sorted by transportation mode that applicants applied for. And so the question before us is how to divvy up essentially $200 million between applications received in 11 different categories. Next slide, please. Here's a breakdown of the TAB and council approved application for how the money should be distributed from a broad sense. So we have $193 million after taking off $5 million for a future unique project, criteria yet to be named. And then that leaves, you can see for roadways, about $107 million if you decide to go to the midpoint of the funding range, $58 million for transit and travel demand management, TDM, and then approximately $28 million for bicycle and pedestrian projects. Next slide, please. A lot of details on the slide, but one thing that Councilmember Barber and Cummings participated in last year about this time was looking at some changes to our transit applications and process. One of those was a arterial BRT project or program where we were setting aside $25 million for a future F line to be named through the Network Next process. We wanted to highlight on this slide towards the bottom of the screen that $25 million. And so at the last TAB meeting, TAB did approve setting aside that money so that council staff show that $25 million and all the funding options or scenarios that we bring back to the TAB, and also pushing out that decision date from what was going to be at the end of this year out to the April timeframe. We can come back to some of all these rules and other things that were put into place maybe as you see the actual projects when we come back in November. Next slide, please. So this is really what we want to get the feedback on. We put together 4 different I would call them themes or concepts before people see the projects and the project lists. And so the first is we're calling the base or midpoint, or kind of the historic approach. Again, we shifted $5 million this cycle from roadways and bike ped over to transit. So this uses the midpoint of those modal funding ranges and then divvies up the money between the application categories based on the number of applications submitted. So multi-use trails, for instance, had 39 or 40 applications. They would get more of the money than the pedestrian facilities, which submitted just a small handful of projects. That's the first general theme as we're putting together these funding scenarios on how to distribute the money to projects. More projects would be to focus on smaller project categories. So those would be things like safe routes to school, pedestrian facilities, more of the ITS, traffic management technologies type projects. Number 3 is focus on bigger projects. So there are certain categories such as the multi-use trails, which have a lot of big trail bridges and trail projects, and also new interchange projects and projects like that are larger projects, have a higher maximum award, but also leverage a lot of local funds. And in some cases can be on the order of 25 to 30 or more $1 million projects in total when you put the federal dollars plus the local dollars. So that's that general concept. And then we are putting together 1 or 2 scenarios related to what Amy and Sarah just presented to you on the TIP and TPP comments One would shift approximately $10 million from roadways to the bicycle pedestrian categories. Another option would be within roadways. This is just a subset of the roadway categories, is to shift some of the those interchange type projects, do fewer of those and fund more reconstruction projects. So we have 4 or 5 different scenarios that we want to bring back to our technical committees and TAB, but did want to give this committee an opportunity to kind of see the direction we were heading and see if there's any other ideas, or if you thought these general concepts were a good start. We can always add more between now and December. Next slide, please. So the last slide here is our schedule. Going to TAB in October for a first look at this funding scenarios. I'd like to come back here on November 23rd to discuss some scenarios and what we've heard from the TAB committees. TAB will approve the projects on December 16th, hopefully. And then we'll come back in the new year, January 11th, to Transportation Committee to concur with the project selection in total, and then on to the council after that. Madam Chair, with that, I'll turn it back over to you and see if there's any feedback from the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Are there any questions from council members?
This is Councilmember Chambliss, Chair.
Councilmember Chambliss.
I don't really have any questions. I like the fact that the way that you've kind of laid it out, so that as we start to get more detailed information, we have a framework to look at and some options to consider. So I will just be saving this information for my toolbox, and then we'll be pulling it out as we continue our discussions. So thank you.
Yeah, my advice to all of you is ask a lot of questions about regional solicitation. It all starts to make a lot more sense as you go through the process. And Steve is a very good resource for that. So any other questions from council members? All right. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Next, we are on to our regional bike transportation network. We have Steve Elmer here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, committee members. I'm going to talk to you about our Regional Bicycle Transportation Network and our RBTN Facility Guidelines and Measures Study. Next slide. Thank you. So I will give you a little background on the RBTN. I haven't had the privilege of presenting to this committee yet. And so some of you are relatively new to the RBTN concept, so I want to get you kind of on the same page. We began with a regional bicycle system study that was completed in 2014. And that study evaluated the extent to which existing networks of our on-street and off-road bikeways serve key regional destinations. We determined a set of key regional destinations for travel by bicycle. We developed a set of principles and criteria for identifying regional bicycle corridors. And ultimately, we needed this study to develop a regional bicycle network for transportation that would be proposed as the region's bicycle transportation network in the 2014 update to our transportation policy plan. Next slide, please. With the help of an interagency policy advisory committee, the study team developed 11 guiding principles for creating regional bicycle corridors. So we use this to guide the development of the regional bicycle network. These were also incorporated later within the TPP and are used in reviewing proposed additions and changes to the RBTN network. Next slide, please. Once the guiding principles were created, we then used a series of data factors to analyze and prioritize where the regional bicycle corridors should be located. And these are the key factors that included existing and future population density, connections to and between our major regional destinations. And this also incorporated existing and planned employment densities, We used public feedback on popular routes and destinations from our 4 open houses across the region throughout the study. We also included potential bicycle travel demand, connectivity to the regional transit system, and distribution of bicycle corridors was assessed with regard to social and economic equity. Next slide, please. The final product of this regional bicycle system study was the Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, shown here, and adopted into the TPP in January of 2015. The network consists of a series of designated alignments and planned corridors, and these alignments and corridors are grouped into 2 priority tiers based on the analysis factors from the study. The RBTN is used in project scoring to receive federal transportation dollars through the council's biannual regional solicitation. Next slide, please. And in addition to funding through the regional solicitation, we use this for planning purposes. The RBTN forms the regional backbone arterial network to serve the region's daily bicycle transportation needs. Specifically, the regional bike travel corridors represent where there is existing or the potential for high demand for bicycle transportation to and between our major regional destinations, and also where specific alignments have not yet been designated through local planning processes. And the RBTN alignments were identified where we have existing or locally planned trails and on-street bikeways that are already identified. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk a little about our current study, but before I talk specifics here, I just want to mention a few points to provide context. Because local bicycle plans continue to develop and evolve, there's a need to consider adding or modifying these RBTN corridors and alignments. And historically and prior to each regional solicitation, we have given local agencies an opportunity to request minor changes to the RBTN corridors or alignments with the purpose to adopt those into an official RBTN map that would be used for scoring for the regional solicitation applications. These requests are then have traditionally been reviewed in the context of the 11 guiding principles I mentioned, and that has been mostly a qualitative review process. So we're currently working to formalize that process to allow for more significant RBTN changes to be considered prior to each regional solicitation. And these more significant changes could be things like adding an entirely new RBTN corridor or alignment, and that has not traditionally been looked at as a possibility. It was not considered for those updates, minor updates that are really between the TPP updates. So this process will allow us to do a more formal and regular update of the RBTN changes and to kind of sync that up with each regional solicitation cycle. And as we're doing that, it is desirable to have a more quantitative means to evaluate proposed updates to the RBTN in the form of changes to RBTN corridors and alignments. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of this current study is twofold. One, to develop these recommended quantifiable measures to help us in evaluating agency proposed changes and additions to the RBTN corridors and alignments. And secondly, to provide recommendations for preferred bicycle facility types on RBTN alignments in our urban and suburban cities and in our rural areas hosting the RBTN. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. The study has just begun. We just began early this month, and it's about a 9 to 10 month study process. So we'll be pushing this out to, this will go out to about midsummer of next year. The study is to be conducted in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be the development of the quantitative measures. And phase 2 will be development of preferred bikeway facility types on RBTN alignments. And we have an ongoing ad hoc bicycle pedestrian peer discussion group, or BIPDIG, that we've been using to help advise us on the development of draft TPP text, as well as overseeing some of our technical studies. That group consists of bike and ped planners and engineers from each of the 7 counties, from a few of our key cities and regional parks implementing agencies, as well as from MnDOT and Metro Transit. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the first phase is to develop the quantitative measures, and the key work tasks include creating a methodology to measure the spacing between the RBTN alignments and corridors across sub-areas of the region, and having a preferred spacing distance for the RBTN corridors will improve our regional network planning by helping us to identify and plan for any gaps that may exist in the coverage areas of our RBTN corridors and alignments. Second task is to create a methodology to compare route directness of a proposed new RBTN segment or change with the existing RBTN or with planned bikeway segments within the same transportation corridor, so sort of an efficiency measure, if you will. The third task is to review all of the RBTN guiding principles for possible quantifiable measures and develop up to 4 new measures to quantify their application and evaluating changes to the RBTN. And lastly, to develop specific guidelines for how these new measures will be applied in this evaluation process. Next slide. Current language in our transportation policy plan lists a range of bikeway facility types that are deemed appropriate for the RBTN, but does not offer guidelines on where or in what circumstances certain bikeway facilities might be preferred. So phase 2 of this study is designed to address this issue. And our key work tasks include, and this first one is already underway by the consultant team, to review relevant bicycle facility guidelines and studies from state and national sources to look for concepts and best practices that might be applied and adapted to our own region here. Also to consider 3 approaches to defining preferred bicycle facility types and planning guidelines, and these include a land use and development patterns emphasis approach, a roadway corridor characteristics or functional classifications emphasis approach, and a hybrid approach that would combine the 2 of those and also consider other factors that may have been cited in the reviews of these state and national studies. And then with the help of this BIPDIG review group, we'll select the best approach and develop draft RBTN preferred bikeway guidelines. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is the overall timeline for the study. Phase 1, the quantitative measures, is the most time sensitive of the 2, so we're doing that first. We began earlier this month, and this will go into January to define draft measures and to finalize those recommendations from the study in February. And then phase 2, the development of the bikeway facility preference types, will go from February to July with draft treatment types in May and final bikeway facility types completed in July, along with completion of the overall study. So that wraps up what I wanted to present to you today. Thank you for listening, and I'll turn it back to Madam Chair to field any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions from council members? None? All right. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate the update.
Thank you very much.
Very good. And that concludes our business for the evening. Unless anyone has anything else, then we can be adjourned.